My name is Kay, and I'm 25 years old. This is something I've had a very difficult time coming to terms with. This story is about one of my best friends. I don't want to give any names, so I'll refer to my friend as Brad. Girlfriend number 1 is Jill, and girlfriend number 2 is Kathy. Brad and I spent a lot of time together, and were close. When I first met him, he was dating Jill. He and Jill dated for a while, but they were one of those couples that would break up and get back together constantly. Eventually, Jill left him for good, and he didn't handle it well. She texted me and said that he was stalking her, and asked if I could talk to him. I did talk to him, but she told me that he kept stalking her and would drive by her house. I asked him about it, and he told me that she was crazy, and that he was never doing any of that to begin with. I believed him because he's my best friend. I found out later that she had a restraining order against him. Brad and I stayed friends and grew closer. He met Kathy and they started dating. They clicked really well, and it seemed like things were going great. But after a few months he told me that they had split, and he suspected that she was seeing someone else behind his back. He went to Kathy's apartment one night and found her with another guy, and everything hit the fan. They got into a fight, and Brad stabbed the guy in the arm, and then vandalized the guy's vehicle. The guy was taken to the hospital, and his injuries were treated. Brad was arrested and pled guilty to assault in the 2nd degree and property damage in the 1st degree. He was sentenced to 3 years in prison, but was released early. Upon release, Brad and I picked up right where we had left off, and things were great again. He was sober and happy as ever. While incarcerated, he was diagnosed with bipolar disorder and severe depression, which I believe played a huge part in what happens next. After being out for less than a month, Kathy came along and they started dating again. I warned him, saying he should just leave her alone because of their history, but he was love drunk and wouldn't listen. They started fighting constantly, and it was bringing him back down to abusing drugs and alcohol. And he couldn't afford his medication due to a lack of health insurance, so his mental stability was wearing thin. I stopped hearing from him altogether. One evening, I was sitting on my couch while scrolling through Facebook, and I read that my local news station had just reported 2 stabbings in a nearby town. 1 male and 1 female, and they were both suffering from injuries inflicted by a sharp object. They said the suspect fled the scene and had not been found. For some strange reason, I had a very bad feeling and felt like I needed to call Brad to check on him. I called him multiple times, and he wouldn't pick up, which gave me a terrible feeling in my gut. Not long after reading the article posted, I saw that there was an update, and the 2 people who suffered stabbed wounds had died from their injuries. They ended up releasing the names, and it felt like my heart skipped a beat. The male was one of Brad's best friends, and the female was Kathy. I immediately knew what happened. There was a search that continued, and the next morning they found Brad coming out of the woods in a nearby park with previously inflicted wounds. He was taken to the hospital for medical attention and was later sent to a correctional center. I broke down finding out my best friend, someone I had spent so much time with over the past few years, someone who I deeply trusted, was guilty of murdering 2 people. When I finally spoke to him, he told me bits and pieces of his side of the story. He said that when he left, they were both still alive. The wounds he was suffering from were from him trying to end his life by cutting his own throat. He said he tried to cut multiple times over and over, and then laid on the ground overnight, feeling himself slip away. He then crawled out of the woods, and that's where they found him and took him to the hospital. He had no idea anyone even died until he finally woke up and came to. He has a court date in May of 2017 to decide whether or not he will get the death penalty. And that's my story. It's about my best friend who I love dearly and how he killed 2 people. I feel deeply for those families who lost their loved ones, but I feel like I lost someone too. Tensions were high around our apartment complex when I was around age 10. In a month's time, we had a man that committed suicide in a unit, a partial fire in a building leading to reconstruction, and a child that had been hit by a car, who later survived. Even at a young age, I remember distinctly having a strong grasp of the bizarre events that were taking place. It had to be around spring of 1997. My mother was single and raising my little sister, about 5 years old, and I. She managed a different complex and would pick us up from school and drop us off at our apartment while she returned to work for a couple more hours. I have 3 older siblings, whom all moved out, that at some point had to keep an eye on each other at a young age. So this really wasn't a new premise. There was no money for a sitter. The oldest just had to assume the role, which was me. For the most part, we were really quiet kids in our second and third story unit. We played with our toys, watched a little television, and sometimes played Sega or Nintendo. On this particular afternoon, I recall playing with a Dash Rendar figurine from Star Wars, while my sister was doing whatever in the same living room. Suddenly, the doorknob started shaking violently. My heart dropped, and I remember it being the first time I had felt so much terror. I rushed to the phone and paged my mom 911, and then dialed 911 to let the operator know that someone was breaking in. The operator reassured me that help was on the way. The door handle was still being messed with, but I was nervous if the deadbolt and chain would be enough. A couple of loud bangs happened, as if someone was ramming into the door with their shoulder. Then it all just stopped. The cops arrived shortly before my mom, only to find a note from the maintenance man saying something like, "Air filter check." Now, the maintenance man claimed that he had announced himself verbally, but I knew that was bullshit. Of course, the cops did nothing, and my mom's complaint to the office didn't yield in this man being fired. Unfortunately, this wouldn't be the most unnerving part of the story. My mom said the guy would stare her down in the parking lot and just smile at her. The whole situation creeped us out, and we wanted to move, but we couldn't afford the expenses. One night a couple of weeks later, I was awoken by a loud thud coming from the roof. Being so easily rattled from my previous event, I ran to my mom's room to wake her up. She checked around to make sure everything was in place, and reassured me it was probably a rodent. We went to school the next morning, and were dropped off at home in the afternoon as usual. Mom usually did a quick sweep of the place, even before the attempted break-in. But this time, something seemed off. It was just a very uneasy feeling the apartment had when walking in. My sister and I were ordered to stay downstairs by the front door, while she investigated upstairs. We waited patiently, and felt very unnerved when suddenly our mother's shrieking confirmed our suspicion. She came barreling down the stairs and ushered us out the door. We went to a neighbor's and phoned the police. My mother was barking at them, "Someone's in our apartment!" The police responded pretty quickly, and I was finally able to understand the situation. The bedroom had a walk-in closet that contained the hatch to the attic that connected the entire building's AC/heat. There were shelves that were pretty high up lining the closet walls. My mother walked in to find a dirty pair of men's tighty-whities underwear laying on the floor. This was enough to send her running and phoning the police. However, the investigation revealed something more. The attic hatch had been disturbed. Just to add, the police found full handprints on the shelves in the closet. The noises I heard the previous night were more than likely this man hoisting himself back up into the crawl space using the shelves to climb on after visiting us. The man was taken into custody, but I don't recall what the sentencing was. I need to look into it. Coincidentally, my older brother is now a homicide detective for that area. We ended up moving into my grandmother's house shortly after. This is my father's story, which I've transcribed from his words. My father has a company located in Coventry, in the United Kingdom. Coventry has its fair share of problems, but despite its reputation, it's no worse than any other city located in or around the Midlands, central UK. In the 80s, my father purchased a 3.0-liter Vauxhall Opel Senator CD. 3.0 liters probably doesn't sound like much compared to the big block engines fitted to American cars, but in the UK most cars don't get much bigger than 2.0 liters. Most are 1.2. The Senator was a vehicle favored by the police for pursuit. It was fast. The car had been tweaked and modified and came with a digital speedometer, which lit up in a cool way when you switched on the ignition. It was like Knight Rider. One summer evening, when driving home with a friend, my father joined a queue of cars waiting on a busy road at a set of traffic lights. The road in question had large houses on one side and an expansive common area on the other. Common areas are similar to parks, but owned by the people, for recreation, dog walks, throwing frisbees, grazing sheep, that sort of thing. Anyway, my father and his friend were sitting in his car chatting when my father notices a man walking, with purpose, across the common towards the row of cars. The man is some way off at this point. The traffic moves forward, and my father's attention returns to the road. He only manages to move forward 3 car lengths before the traffic lights turn red. He looks back towards the common, and is surprised to see that the man has closed the distance and is now standing motionless next to the passenger window. My father can only see the man's midsection, but can see that he is dressed in tatty and shambolic clothing. My father's friend continues to talk, oblivious to the man's presence. The man walks towards the front of the car, mechanically turns, and stops in front of the car to face my father through the windscreen. My father's eyes met the stranger's, and he takes in his appearance. He is all over dirt and shades of brown. His skin is waxy and his eyes are wild with rage. My father's friend, who had finally stopped talking and noticed the man, exclaims, "What's this guy's problem?" The stranger raises his arm and menacingly points through the windscreen at my father. Then the traffic light turns green. "Get out of the way, you prize prat!" yells my father. But the stranger just stands there with his eyes wide and baleful. Drivers in the cars behind, shouting and blowing their horns. My father hits his horn, and in response, and with lightning speed, the man scrambles onto the bonnet. My old man is a big man. I know everyone in these stories exaggerates the size of their brothers, boyfriends, etc., and they all seem to be trained in the military or in MMA and close quarters fighting, but my dad's just a normal Joe. He is, however, a lump, and though he has never been in great shape, stands 6'3" and has the patience of a grenade. My father is now enraged and releases his belt and turns to open the door, but his friend noticed a blade clenched in the stranger's hand and stops him and points it out. It's a short plastic-handled knife, but a knife nonetheless. "Right," murmurs my father, and puts the car in drive and hits the accelerator, moving quickly towards him before hitting the brakes. This has the desired effect and makes the stranger slide off the bonnet and onto the road and out of view. Of course, my father and his friend can no longer see him and cannot drive forward. Once again, the traffic light turns red. Quite a few of the drivers behind my father have rolled down their windows and can be heard shouting. My father's attention is relocated to another man walking towards the car from the common that's shouting and pointing at my father. "I saw what you did! You hit that man with your car!" The man stops to tend to the stranger, who remains out of sight. "That can't be sensible," my father murmurs. For his trouble, the man receives a punch to the side of the head and reels backwards, but quickly regains his balance, and quickly turns and like an athlete runs off and doesn't look back. There's a moment of calm, before the stranger's arms flop onto the bonnet and he starts to scramble back towards the windscreen. He is baring his teeth and his eyes are wide with adrenaline, spittle dripping from his mouth. "This guy's gone wrong," my father says to his friend. The light turns green, and my father floors the accelerator, taking off at a maximum acceleration. With not too much to grab a hold of on that streamlined car, the stranger went sideways, rolled onto the roof, down the rear of the car, and off the back of the car, all with a series of muffled thuds. Thankfully, the road had opened up in front, and my father could put some distance between him and that dirty stranger. He looked back to now see the man on his feet, and now attacking the car that had been immediately behind him. This was pre-mobile phones, so my father drove a little way down the road to a phone box and called the police. Apparently, the man just kept on attacking cars indiscriminately until the police arrived. The car had a few scuffs and scratches, which were buffed out. The dirty stranger did not make the news, and my father never had any further feedback from the police. He doesn't know if the stranger was on drugs, crazy, or both. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe, and share it with your friends. If you would like a chance to have your story featured in an upcoming video, make sure you email it to urmaker6260@gmail.com. And if you would like early access to any of my videos, make sure you go check out my Patreon page. I have a few different reward tiers, and all of them come with early access, so you'll never have to fight to be first in the comments, if that's your thing, and at the same time you're helping out the channel. So this story is a little bonus story. As it goes on, you'll see why it's a bonus story. Hope you enjoy. Before I begin my story, I'd like to state that I'm 15 and I'm male. The following occurrence happened last night, and I'm still pretty unsettled by what went down. It was around 2 o'clock in the morning, and I had been FaceTiming one of my friends. Since it was around 2 a.m., I decided I need to get as much sleep as possible so that I wouldn't regret procrastinating on summer sleep. Also, I was feeling pretty drained and tired from the previous day, so I didn't really want to lose any sleep at all. After I ended the conversation with my friend, I plugged my phone back in the charger and decided to get ready for bed. The neighborhood I live in isn't really known for any criminal activity. Hardly any break-ins or anything like that ever happens. After I made myself comfortable, I doze off in my sleep for a good 5 minutes until I hear a car park across the street from our house. I decided to take a peek out the window to see what was going on, and I also thought it was quite suspicious for someone to park on our street in the middle of the night. It looked like a man in an old-fashioned Cadillac who was in his early to mid-20s. I watched as he sat in his car and rolled a blunt. He must have been sitting there for a good 8 minutes smoking pot directly across the street from our house in his car. I also noticed he was pretty anxious and desperate to do something, most likely something up to no good. However, it didn't really terrify me at first. I just thought he was a guy that simply felt like smoking dope late at night. It wasn't until he stepped out of his car that I knew I had to stay cautious. Once he stepped out, he began walking towards our house. I immediately ran into my parents' bedroom and switched on the lights and said that there was a guy on our porch. My dad instinctively ran down the stairs and saw the man peeking through the window of our front door. My dad and I proceeded to run to my bedroom window to scare him away. This is when my dad said in a deep and startling yell, "Hey, what are you doing?" The man peeked out and said that he needed to get some water. This left us pretty confused and a bit freaked out. My mom just decided to call 911, especially since there's no reason to be on anyone else's property at that time of night. Right after my dad and I turned away from the window, the man ran to his car and sped off. The police said that they would patrol the area where he was at and notify us if they found him. However, he was never found. So as you can tell, that's why I had to consider it a bonus story. I guess I could see some people thinking that's creepy. I personally find it kind of funny, because the dude might have just had cotton mouth really bad, and he was high, so he made a stupid choice like, I'm gonna go up to the stranger's house and be like, "Yo, got some water?" And they just called the cops. Which I don't blame him for doing, because you don't know what they're gonna do, but at the same time, in his mind it probably sounded like a good idea. Either way, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll catch you in the next one. And just remember, it's always scarier if it's true.